This is the all-new Samyang or Rokinon AF 12mm f2 lens for the Sony E mount. Samyang sent me this a few weeks ago for me to review, and I've been personally very excited about this lens because around 4 or 5 years ago, I used to own the original manual focus version of this lens for my A6000, and that was one of my favorite lenses for the E mount. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who owned that lens. That was a very popular lens for Sony users for landscapes, astrophotography, real estate, architecture. It was extremely versatile, well made, and affordable. It had the recipe for everything there is to like about a lens, and it had a unique focal length which at the time, and I think still, could only be covered with Sony's 10-18, and that lens used to cost 3 or 4 times more, and that's an f4 lens. About its only weakness was that it was a manual focus lens, which is not a big deal considering its price, but now that it has autofocus, it just opened up a bunch of new possibilities. So as usual, let's take a look at this lens in more detail. I'll show you how this performs and what kind of images you can expect out of this. So without further ado, let's get started. And first of all, let me just say this is the best feeling and the best looking Samyang lens that I've ever seen. It looks really good on my A6600 as well. It's actually slightly smaller and lighter than the old manual focus lens, and the size of it is pretty much perfect for Sony mirrorless cameras. The focus ring feels really nice, and I love the pattern on it as well. It comes with a hood, and it also looks very good on the lens. It's functional but not too big. One thing to note though, you can't reverse the hood to make it more compact like most other lenses. But the lens itself is so small, and the hood only sticks out about half an inch from the lens cap, so I had no problem carrying this even in my smallest camera bags. And I know a lot of people would be excited about this. This lens is now weather sealed. For a lens in this price range, what's not to like about that? And speaking of the price, this will go on sale this month for $399 US, which is currently anywhere from $100 to $150 more than the manual focus version, but still about half of Sony's 10-18 f4. 12mm on crop sensor is pretty wide, but nowhere near fisheye territory. This is the lens to document everything without too much distortion. In terms of optical performance, it's pretty excellent. Not just good for the price, it's actually very good. It is extremely sharp wide open. If anything, there's a tiny bit of color fringing and loss of contrast at f2, but at 2.8 everything becomes pretty much perfect, and f4 seems maybe a little bit better, but not by much. In other words, I wouldn't be afraid to keep this lens in f2 for most situations. There's a little bit of barrel distortion, but this much is probably expected from this focal length. About 3-point correction seems to get rid of it. In terms of corner sharpness, it is very good until you get to the very end. As you can see, the overall image is very sharp, but then this maybe about 300 to 500 square pixels on the corners out of the 24 megapixel image. The sharpness just falls off dramatically. At around f8, it gets a lot better, but still nowhere near as good as the rest of the image. But these are relatively small areas in the image, and the distortion correction will cut out most of this, so I don't think it'll be an issue to most people. Looking at normal images instead of test charts, I never even noticed this. With its wide aperture, you can also create some decent subject separation, and the background blur doesn't look too bad either. The lens now has 7 aperture blades, 1 more than the old lens, so you can expect a slightly smoother and even bokeh balls. And shooting indoors with poor lightings, the f2 aperture really helps to keep the ISO down for sharper and cleaner images. The minimum focusing distance is about 20 centimeters or about 7.5 inches. And again, even wide open at this range, it is very sharp, and it only gets better if you stop it down a little. While testing this lens for a few weeks, the autofocus worked flawlessly, and I never had to be reminded that this was a third-party lens. And the images were always sharp. I never even had to question if I got the focus right, like with the old manual focus lens. And one thing you could not do before with the old manual focus lens, real-time face and eye tracking. Like I mentioned, this will be a game changer for vloggers because this is the only lens in this price range and focal length with an f2 aperture. And the autofocus is virtually silent. I mean, if you put your ear right next to it in a really quiet room, you may hear some noise, but otherwise it's very, very quiet. The images straight out of the camera overall had very nice colors. Some of the older Samyang lenses that I've tested seem to favor more green, but this seems a lot more neutral to me. Samyang also improved the haze and flare performance. These images were both shot at f16, and compared to the old lens, obviously the flare isn't completely gone, but it generally looks a lot cleaner and less harsh, therefore much more manageable. So I don't know if you can tell, but I'm struggling to find anything that I don't like about this lens, and I think this will be another instant classic like the old lens was. At the time of recording this video, this lens is only available for the Sony E-mount, and Samyang hasn't officially confirmed if they're planning on releasing this lens for any other camera mounts, but I hope they do like they did with the old manual focus lens. And let me know in the comments if you'd like to see this lens for your Canon, Fuji, or any Micro Four Thirds cameras. So yeah, the Samyang autofocus 12mm f2 lens, and I really like this lens, so I highly recommend it. And if you have any more questions about this lens, just leave a comment down below and I'll try to get to them all. And thank you for watching, and that's gonna be it for me today, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.